Hello, صباح الخير من أمريكا. Buenos dias. It is Friday. Happy Friday to everyone, wherever you are in the world. And whether it's the morning or the evening for you, write in the comments. And as you can see, I have a different background today. So this is my 6th Friday webinar in a row, and I'm really excited to keep doing this because my goal with the webinars is to just connect with people in any country hoping to study in the US in a more personal way, and to hear what might be holding you back from studying in the United States and talking about it on Fridays. So make sure to check back in every Friday if you want to be a part of the conversation, or watch the replay later if it's more convenient for you. And you can type your questions in the comments and I will get to those as well if you have questions about the topics that we're discussing. So it's going to be a fun day. Today we're talking about money and the cost of living in the US. So maybe I'll start off with asking a question. Why are you watching this video? Is it one, you want to come to the US to study English? Is it two, you want to come to the US to study an academic major? Or three, there's another reason. And if any of those apply to you, then you're going to have questions about how much it costs to live here, to study here, for whether it's 2 weeks or 2 years, because everyone needs to know how they can prepare financially for studying in the US. So to start off with, I think I should define what the phrase cost of living means. And I will also type this in the comments so that you can clearly see. Cost of living means the level of prices for a range of everyday items. So just basically, how much does it cost to live somewhere and pay for all of the necessary things that you have to pay for in life? This is the same in your country or here. There is a cost of living for the area that you live. So if you have any questions about that, also feel free to throw them in the chat. And just want to point out, I have my Al Hilal sweatshirt on again today. So let's say you've already decided that you've got to come to the US to study or live, and nothing's going to stop you. Great, but how much are you going to spend while you're here? The first question to ask yourself is, where am I going to live? So this is really what makes the largest difference on how much you're going to have to spend in the United States to live here. So it can be the same in any country, really, and it's going to probably be the same in your country, but living expenses are different, or the amount of money that you have to pay for things is different depending on whether you live in a small town or a big city, what region of the country that you live in. So the United States is huge. There's all different types of climates, big cities, small towns, different subcultures in the United States. So what's true in one place may not always be true in another when we're talking about how much money that you need to spend or you will have to spend on daily living expenses. And I will talk more about what these actual expenses are later on in the webinar. So generally, when we're talking about different regions of the United States, the Midwest, which are the American states in the middle of the country, the very center of the country, which is where I am from the state of Missouri, and oh, sorry, lost you. And the southern states are the least expensive or have the lowest cost of living. So the Midwest and the South have the lowest expenses when it comes to things like food and transportation and housing. So if the Midwest and Southern states are the least expensive, or the prices are the lowest in the middle and southern parts of the country, then the most expensive places to live are Hawaii, which is like a tropical paradise island, or a group of islands that is in the Pacific Ocean that belongs to the United States, close to Japan, and Alaska, which is a state in the northwest of the country that actually is not attached to the continental United States, but is next to Canada. And then the northeast and west coast, so like states like New York, Massachusetts, Vermont up in the northeast, and then the west coast like California, Oregon, Washington. So basically you have to pay for, good weather like tropical temperatures or beach views. If you're in California, it's a very popular place to live. Everyone wants to live, especially in Southern California, because the weather is fantastic all the time, sunny. So these are things to think about when you are looking at schools, places you might want to study, whether it's in a smaller town or a bigger city, or these regions of the United States. Where is it located? Because you will pay less money to live in the United States if you are not in the more expensive areas of the country. So let's go into this. And just from my own experience in college and at a university, I went to a college in a small town called Springfield. And fun fact, there is a Springfield and a town called Springfield in almost every state in the United States. Some of you may know this from the TV show The Simpsons. And so I went to school in Springfield in Missouri, and it was a town of about 300,000 people. Most of the people were college students at the university that I attended. And it was a more rural area in the Midwest, like I said, so the middle of the country, and the cost of living for things like transportation, food, and housing were very, very low. So for an example, my rent at my apartment that I lived in was between $200 and $400 a month, which is very, very low for if you're comparing it to rent in a city like Los Angeles or Washington, D.C. or New York, or even just bigger cities in the Midwest. So to have a rent, maybe I should define that word too. So rent is how much you pay to live in either a house or an apartment. It's what you pay every month to live where you're living. Type that in here too. What you pay to live in a house or apartment every month. So for me, $200 to $400 per month for rent in Springfield, Missouri, which is so little amount of money. And of course, everything else costs less too, like food and transportation, because the town was smaller, so it was easier to get from one place to another. And now compare that to currently, I live in the Washington, D.C. area, or have moved here from the Midwest, and the cost of food is much higher than the Midwest. My rent is much higher. Transportation costs more. Pretty much everything. So entertainment, if I want to go to a restaurant or to a concert or something like that, it's going to cost more. And so just an idea of range for what rent might cost here in a bigger city on the East Coast, highly populated area is, I mean, it can be anywhere for a 1-bedroom apartment, just a smaller size apartment, from $1,500 all the way up to in the 2000s, almost 3,000 range, depending on where you're located. So also put that in here too. Per month in Washington, D.C. area. So it's a very large difference. And so these are some things that are really important for you to take into consideration when you are planning your studying in the United States and you're making your budget and saving money the year or months before you're coming, to know what an estimate of how much you might spend per month is. So what affects the cost of living? And so the first thing I said was the region of the United States that you're living in. So the center or south of the country is less expensive versus the east or west coast or Hawaii or Alaska. And if you're in a big city or a small town. And then there's some other things that will affect how much you're going to spend in the United States as well while you're studying or living here. So first is your housing choice. So whether you choose to live in an apartment or in a homestay host family and with an American host family, or in the dormitories. So like I said, just a national range of rent, if you're going to live in a apartment or a house, can really range from about, what did I have on here, $600 to about $3,000 a month. So even what I said, my living situation when I was in college, which was also a few years ago, so the prices probably have gone up since then. But just the national average of rent price for a 1-bedroom apartment is about $600 to $3,000 per month. National average of rent. So that, what does that range mean? So on the lower end, if you're paying around $600 a month for rent, that means you're living in a smaller city in a less expensive region of the country, versus the 3,000, the higher end of the range, bigger city and more expensive area of the country. So like I said, Washington, D.C. area is right on that higher end of the scale for rent, anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 a month for a 1-bedroom apartment if you're in DC. So that gives you kind of an estimate of what you might be spending per month if you're living in an apartment or a house that you're renting. And an apartment, or another thing to add to that, if you have roommates, of course, though, this will be less expensive. So if you have a 2-bedroom, 2 or 3-bedroom apartment, or you're living in a house with other college students, then you can split the rent and it'll be more cost effective or less expensive for you. So I do recommend this option if you know other students, or you can use online tools to find roommates when you're living somewhere near your college or university. So let's see. An apartment or a rented house may or may not be less expensive than living on campus in a dorm. So this is another option for your housing when you're living in the United States. So I'll put this word in the chat too, dorm, or the full word is dormitory. And this is a university or college residence hall. This meaning that it's like an apartment complex, but the university owns it and it's on campus. You live on campus where your classes are, and the cafeteria and everything else is right where you're living. So that is another option for your housing. And sometimes even if you are a freshman, which is the first year of college, if you're doing an undergraduate degree, you have 4 years of college, and the first year you are a freshman. This is what it's called. If you're a freshman, sometimes the university or college will actually require that you live on campus in a dorm for your first year. So this will include a meal plan, meaning you will eat at the cafeteria at the school. So you're paying for a room in your dormitory and the meal plan at the cafeteria. And if you are living in a dorm, this may be another concern that a lot of international students have, or something you're looking forward to if you have a positive attitude about it, is that you'll be assigned a roommate in your dorm that you will live with. So this will be another American student or maybe an international student, and you will share a room or a common living space. So it's a really good way to make friends. Don't be scared of that experience. Everyone has gone through that if they've lived or they've gone to college, myself included. I had a random roommate when I was a freshman or my first year of college, and we got to know each other and we're friends by the end of the year. So most of the time it works out. So another option that you have for housing is a host family or an American homestay. So this is usually cheaper, less expensive than both the dorms, the dormitory on campus, and renting your own apartment or house close by to campus. And you can usually choose how many meals that you want to pay for every day that your host family cooks for you. And if you're trying to learn English, this is an especially good option because you will get to practice speaking English with your host family every day. So this is the third housing option that you have as an international student. So an apartment or house off campus that you rent, pay money for every month. The dorms or dormitory, which is housing where you live on campus with other students and pay for a meal plan at the cafeteria, or you live with an American homestay or host family and they cook you your meals and you pay for how much you want to pay for, basically. And that's usually the least expensive option out of all those three. All right, so other expenses that you'll have to consider are, where am I? Groceries. So the word groceries, it comes from, which you'll also hear in grocery store or groceries, is the food sold in a grocery store, obviously, or a supermarket, if you may have heard that term before. So how much could you expect to pay for groceries or food that you buy? And the average person can spend anywhere between $300 to $600 a month. This in here. I think I actually spent less than $300 a month when I was in college because, like I said, I went to college in a smaller town. Everything cost less, and I just didn't have very extravagant food tastes at the time. So your grocery bill, or how much you spend on food per month, is of course going to depend on your eating habits. If you need like special food, or you have certain dietary restrictions, it may cost more. A meal plan at a university, so if you're living in a dorm or a dormitory, when you'll have to pay for a meal plan, can cost anywhere between $250 to $600. 900, sorry. Oh, shoot. Sorry about that. So if you're living in a dorm and you have to pay for a meal plan, got that number wrong, $250 to $950 per month for a meal plan in the dorms. And I got these numbers from schools, colleges, or universities that were in, again, smaller towns versus bigger cities, and also more prestigious universities like Harvard or Stanford, that you may have heard these big names before for American universities. Their meal plans, I mean, the cost of anything, if you're going to go to Harvard, is going to be more than if you go to a university like I did in the Midwest, in the middle of the country. So their meal plans were closer to the $950 side of that range that students had to pay every month for meals in the cafeteria. So that is in the dorms. And then food for, let's say you're living in a apartment or a house, or a homestay, or the dorms. You might want to just go out to eat at a restaurant sometimes. So you can expect to pay, again, this is a range. The lower end is in smaller towns or the middle or southern part of the country. The higher end of the range is in bigger cities and more expensive parts of the country. So on average, $5 to about $10 for breakfast if you're eating out. Maybe even more than that, actually, because I've had breakfast here around Washington, D.C., and it can be more than $10. So 5 to 10 or more for breakfast if you're eating at a restaurant. About $8 to $20 for lunch. Of course, this depends on what kind of restaurant you're going to as well. I think that's already sort of obvious, but if you're going to like Chipotle versus a fancy restaurant, then of course you're not going to be paying $8 at a fancy restaurant for lunch. And then for dinner, you can just expect an average of $10 to about $30 for dinner, depending on where you are, what type of restaurant you're at. So in bigger cities like Chicago, Los Angeles, and New York, you can expect to pay a lot more for food and drinks. So that's just, I guess, my last thing I have to say on that. So the amount of money that you're going to be spending for food, whether you're going to a grocery store or you're going to a restaurant, again, depends on where you are and what type of restaurant. So it depends on you and your habits for eating. Do you like to have fancy meals, or are you okay with something less expensive? So let's see, the next thing that will affect your budget and how much you're going to spend in the United States is transportation costs. So public transportation is an interesting thing in the United States because it can be pretty different from other countries, especially like countries I have visited. For example, in Europe, their public transportation system is just awesome, like very easy to use. It goes everywhere. We're talking about like trains and buses and other form like the metro, and It's really easy to use public transportation to get anywhere you want in Europe, and everyone uses it. It's like a common thing for people to commute to work using public transportation. And let me make sure I just define what that is. So public transportation, meaning anything but your own personal car that you use to get around from place to place. So a metro, a bus, a train, a boat, maybe? I don't know. Yeah, I think that would be considered public transportation, a boat, or like Uber services like a taxi or Uber. So not your personal form of transportation. So in the US, because the country is so huge and spread out, a lot of even big cities are very spread out. So you have your downtown and then several neighborhoods and areas around downtown. And then what's called the suburbs, which is further away from downtown. And it's very common for Americans to have their own car. So Americans love their cars, actually. And part of that is because the US is so big and spread out, it's just not as easy to get from one side to the other of a city without a car. So public transportation really depends on like what kind of public transportation is available to you in your city that you're studying. Really depends on the size of the city usually. So big cities, of course, have metros, buses, above ground rails, streetcars, and pretty much any type of public transportation. Medium-sized cities, so between a big city and a small town, usually have one or two of these types of public transportation available, maybe buses and like a streetcar or something. And which is actually the case for the town I'm from in Missouri as well. It's a bigger city, but not as big as like Chicago or Los Angeles. So we have buses and a streetcar, and that's it for public transportation, plus like Uber and stuff. But so then if you're in a smaller town, you may not have any of these public transportation options available to get from where you live to school or to the grocery store. So where I went to school, again in the smaller town in Springfield, there was no metro, no streetcar, very few taxis, some Uber. Actually, after I left, Uber started, and they did have some buses that went around the small town. So this is something to keep in mind, because either you will need to use public transportation as a student, buy your own car, which I have seen international students do, especially if they're going to be here for, a 4-year bachelor's degree or more than 4 years to do a bachelor's and master's or something like that. Then they decide that they want to buy their own car, which is perfectly fine, but you need to take that cost into consideration when you are planning your budget to come here to study. So how much can you expect to pay for public transportation per month, maybe? So a monthly pass for public transportation, like the metro, can cost between $45 to $100. Put that in here. $45 to $100 per month. But as a student, you can get a discount on these kinds of things. So your like Metro Pass, that you tell them that you're a student. You can get a lot of student discounts on things. So keep that in mind. Movie tickets and stuff. So I think that's pretty much it on that, on public transportation. if you do want to travel, let's say that you go to school in a bigger city like New York or Chicago, and you want to travel outside of the city to visit other places, go to the suburbs, then most of the time you'll need a car. So you'll have to rent a car or hitch a ride with one of your friends that has a car, just because it's not as easy to walk from place to place like in Europe. All right, so to finish this webinar, just wanted to mention a couple other expenses that you'll need to consider and prepare for as a student in the United States. These are books. So every semester you'll have to purchase your books and other materials that your teachers want you to buy for their class. This has a pretty wide range also, but from my own experience, it can cost anywhere from about $300 to $500 per semester. So it is a significant cost that you will need to be prepared for at the beginning of each semester that you study. Insurance is another thing that you'll have to pay for, which is required of any international student, that they have health insurance while they're here. Let's see. Health insurance is anywhere from about $350, and I'll put that in here as well, $350 to $550 per semester for health insurance. So you will have health insurance through the school that you are studying at. And if you're a sponsored student, like by your government or employer, then they pay your health insurance and you don't pay the school for health insurance. Finally, your lifestyle, of course, will affect how much you spend in the United States every month. So if you're someone who likes to go to concerts, the movies, go out on the weekends, this will also cost more in a bigger city versus a smaller or medium-sized city. But if you do like going out and doing a lot of activities, going to concerts or whatever, a bigger city would offer more options for that. So also, again, speaking from experience, when I went to college in a small town in Springfield, there are definitely less options for entertainment or like fun things that you can do on the weekends or outside of class. So a lot of students just kind of have to like make fun on their own or figure out creative ways to have fun in a smaller town. So if you do want to experience a bigger city, more nightlife and things to do on the weekends, then that's a better option for you, but you will have to pay more for that. So that's it for today on the cost of living in the US. And if you're watching this replay after the live stream, then throw your comments or questions in the comments below the video and I can answer them for you, or just would love to hear about your own experience with the cost of living in the US if you have experienced some of these things before just visiting the United States. And of course, I want to mention that I have a much more in-depth overview of the cost of living in the United States, and in addition to a cost of living calculator where you can actually put in some numbers and compare different cities in the United States of how much things cost, in my full online course, How to Study in the US, which I put the link at the top of the chat and I'll put it again down here. If you're interested, it's on a discount right now for another couple days, so definitely check that out. Or if you would prefer having one-on-one advising with me, we'll talk about everything from A to Z on how to study in the US, and you will get personalized attention for your own situation and get to talk to me. over video or phone. So I will put those links in the chat, and they're also in the description of the video. Thank you for joining me for this 6th Friday live webinar in a row, and I hope the information was helpful to you in some way.